WFYI podcast brought to you by Bloomington, Indiana, an American college town offering food and drink, college sports, outdoor activities, live music, cool art, and good times daily. Everyone is welcome in Bloomington. More information at visitbloomington.com.
This is WFYI News Now. It's May 6th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, local reactions to the Biden administration moving to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug. The ACLU sues Indiana University over its handling of political protests on campus. And 6 candidates for Indiana governor in Tuesday's Republican primary all have different ideas on K-12 education. Those stories coming up. But first, pro-Palestinian protests are popping up on college campuses around the country, including an encampment at IUPUI. Student Laith Abdul-Bari was one of the first students to set up the camp and has this to say to the people of Gaza.
We are so sorry for your losses, and we are in solidarity with you, and no matter what, we will stand with you.
Abdul-Bari and a few others started the encampment on April 26th. 1 week later, that number had grown to about 30 people camping out, with a steady stream of supporters visiting throughout the day, including faculty, staff, and community members. According to the Palestinian Solidarity Committee at IUPUI, their demands include a Muslim and Middle Eastern cultural center and divestment from Israel. Abdul-Bari is part Palestinian and part Mexican. He says the multicultural support they're getting is important.
Essentially, they're like, we've never garnered this much support ever. And I think they see when the queer community, when the white folk and the black folk and other brown folk come together.
So far, Abdul-Bari says the demonstration has been peaceful and says IUPUI has not interfered with the camp, which is on reserved campus space. And the Biden administration announced it's moving to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug. The move could put pressure on the Indiana General Assembly to take some steps toward cannabis legalization. The federal proposal would make marijuana a Schedule III drug on par with ketamine, some steroids, and Tylenol with codeine. Justin Swanson is an Indiana lobbyist who works on cannabis issues. He says this latest development is just more momentum that's been building in Indiana.
I think the easier sell politically is the medical route because again, you're going to hear from everyday Hoosiers whose quality of life is improved, either mentally or physically because of these products.
Swanson argues full legalization for medical and recreational use is the more effective plan. He says it helps ensure the black market is eliminated.
That's ultimately how you unburden law enforcement. We haven't seen many states get this right, and I do think Indiana is in a position to kind of put forth the red state model on cannabis reform.
The Indiana Chamber of Commerce has been one of the leading voices against cannabis legalization, continuing to oppose recreational use. And in the wake of the federal proposal, the chamber says it still largely opposes medical use without further testing in clinical trials. The ACLU of Indiana is suing Indiana University on behalf of 3 people who were banned from the campus for participating in political protests. The organization cites that the school violated the First Amendment rights of a Bloomington resident, a tenured IU Bloomington professor, and a current graduate student at the school. They all face a 1-year ban from the campus for their participation in the protests. The suit seeks to dismiss the ban so the plaintiffs can access the campus and participate in current and future demonstrations. Since April 25th, more than 56 arrests have been made during pro-Palestinian protests in IU's Dunn Meadow. And for our final story today, Tuesday is primary election day when voters will go to the polls. The primary will narrow a pool of 7 candidates for governor to just 2 competitors. The crowded race on the Republican side is made up of U.S. Senator Mike Braun, businessman Brad Chambers, Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch, former Attorney General Curtis Hill, Eric Weddle, and Jamie Rittenauer. Former State Superintendent Jennifer McCormick is the sole Democrat on the ballot. To explain what the race means for students and families, WFYI Statehouse education reporter Rachel Fradette spoke with education editor Eric Weddle.
So, Rachel, you reached out to all of the candidates running for governor on the GOP side, sent them a survey to answer questions about education, because whoever wins this primary and goes on in November, and if they win to become the next governor, they're going to have a lot of say over education in the state. So what were some of the key takeaways that you heard from them?
They all had very different takes on what's working and what isn't. It was tough to find a thread that kind of connected all of them because they all had very different plans or opinions about where the state is going. Like former Attorney General Curtis Hill called the Department of Education a bloated bureaucracy.
Okay.
And he was really pushing for parental rights. And Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch called for a return to the 4 R's, which are reading, writing, arithmetic, and reasoning.
Okay. I see what you did there. Yeah. Okay.
So she's a little old school.
Okay.
And then, so the businessman, Brad Chambers, wants to see a move to more skill-based, work-based learning that can boost up the trades in Indiana. He feels it should be more, if not the same priority as pursuing a 4-year degree as a high school student. You know, as they're thinking about their future, they should have the opportunity to consider maybe a trade, work-based learning, just as much as they would consider going to a 4-year college in the state.
Okay. One of the issues of universal pre-K, that's long been a goal of Democrats to get that passed. What did these Republicans say about that, if anything?
Yeah, Eric Daudelin was really fascinating because he's pushing for universal pre-K, which many in his party don't necessarily support. He also said it's important that pre-K attendance not be limited because of somebody's geography or like a family's income, because he thinks those are barriers to the expansion of this program, and he finds it valuable, particularly because the state is in the middle of a literacy crisis.
Okay.
Crouch and Chambers want to expand the state's existing pre-K program to more children. They both have different ways of doing that. They don't exactly agree on everything, but they both kind of want to work with the infrastructure that they have and maybe expand and build off of that. And then Rittenauer believes a universal pre-K plan is kind of like a one-size-fits-all approach to a complex issue, and it forgets the existing options that families already have here in the state.
So one of the major roles the governor has for education is appointing the state superintendent of education. Yep. Did any of the candidates say who they would pick or if they would keep the current secretary, Katie Jenner?
So this was like our throwaway question, I think, when I talked to you about it. I was not expecting to see all of the candidates share as much as they did. Needless to say, under these administrations, these hopeful administrations, the current IDOE head, Katie Jenner, might be ousted.
Okay.
No one said they would keep her, which I don't know what we were expecting, but to have all of them kind of come out with a different idea of where they would go or not necessarily promise, a future job is fascinating. In fact, like Rittenauer, she's already out with her Secretary of Education, who's Paige Miller. Miller runs the Hamilton County chapter of Moms for Liberty. And that's the same one that's met like a lot of controversy in the last year.
Yeah, that's interesting, just thinking about to Katie Jenner and Eric Holcomb, because it seemed like their relationship was trying to downplay controversy in education after the previous administration. So one person you have not mentioned is Senator Mike Braun, who is the expected frontrunner in this race. What did he say?
So Braun had more limited responses to our question. In fact, he didn't even answer our one question about expanding pre-K. He kept things really simple.
How simple was that? I mean, I know he's spoken publicly about favoring parental rights and school choice. Were there no details that he got into?
Well, when most candidates kind of highlighted specific plans, Braun spoke more generally about improving student outcomes. He wants to see state money get to kids in a swifter pattern instead of being held up. He believes it's held up in school and state administrative costs.
The only Democratic candidate for governor on the ballot is Jennifer McCormick, who is the former Secretary of Education. You sent questions to her. What stuck out from that?
Yeah, McCormick is an educator, so that's clearly where her passions lie in her campaign. Recently, she was endorsed by the state's largest teachers union. McCormick said she wants to put competent people back in charge of state agencies, and she alluded that includes the Department of Education.
That's a lot to keep in mind for voters who are going to be voting tomorrow. Thank you, Rachel, for chatting with me.
No, thank you, Eric.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Drew Daudelin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Abriana Herron. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.